The year is 1999.
SpongeBob and liftoff.
Health of these.
You're one of its warmest welcomes.
And you, a soldier of the 12th Northern Light Infantry in the Pakistani army, have been assigned to disguise yourself as an intruder in order to infiltrate the borders of a neighboring nation. Your mission is to occupy and fortify the mountain peak known as Tiger Hill in the Kargil region of Kashmir. Tiger Hill, also known by its trigonometric height as 0.5062, holds a strategic advantage in the region due to its elevation, as it overlooks the enemy's logistic lifeline in the region known as National Highway 1. Your presence on the mountain effectively establishes control over your enemies like a chokehold on their necks. Furthermore, the challenging terrain surrounding you makes it nearly impossible for your adversaries to launch an attack on your position. Even if they attempted to, the clear line of sight stretching over a distance of more than 3 kilometers would make it as easy as shooting a fish in a barrel. At the top of the world, you feel unbeatable, akin to a god with the power to strike down anyone who dares to lay their eyes upon you. You are untouchable. You feel invincible. But how did we get here? Why was this war even being fought for? Well, buckle up, buckaroos, as today I'm going to dive into the topic of the Kargil conflict, the secret weapon which made all this possible, and more specifically, the incredible air offensive undertaken by the Indian Air Force. The Kargil War was a conflict between India and Pakistan in 1999, arising from the territorial disputes over Kashmir. Pakistani forces disguised as militants infiltrated the Indian-controlled side of the line of control, which is the de facto border in that region. Their goal was to seize strategic positions and cut off the Indian supply lines, aiming to force India into favorable negotiations over Kashmir. The Indian army was caught off guard by these incursions, but upon discovering the infiltrators, they quickly launched Operation Vijay to evict them. However, the Indian army faced a major challenge due to the brutal and unforgiving terrain. Just look at it, it's like a wet dream for a rock climber. But the Indian soldiers had to fight over it. Mind you, the Indian forces were also restricted to the Indian side of the territory to avoid any escalations. One such critical position under siege was Tiger Hill, and the Indian Air Force was called in to help the army dislodge the intruders from there. But the Air Force also had a major problem on their hands. The lack of intelligence on the intruders made the strike sorties increasingly difficult. The ground attackers essentially had to locate their targets and then attack them, which required proper reconnaissance. A few early attempts at reconnaissance were made, but were eventually unsuccessful. For example, during a recce mission, one of the Indian Canberra aircrafts was shot at and hit by a surface-to-air missile, but eventually made it back to base. A solution was needed, and the Indian Air Force had just the aircraft for the job. It was a highly secretive aircraft codenamed Garuda. Garuda being a Hindu demigod who is the mount of the Hindu god Vishnu. This aircraft was none other than the MiG-25. Now I know, naming a jet after a mythological creature might seem a bit exaggerated, but trust me when I say this, the MiG-25 in the Indian Air Force was no less than a mythological creature. It was so secretive that most of the Air Force personnel were not even aware of it. You would often hear the roar of the MiG-25, but never see it. Most of its operations were conducted with minimal radio transmissions, and in case a MiG-25 had to divert onto another runway, the whole airspace needed to be shut down in order to accommodate it. With this pretext, let's get into the actual involvement of the MiG-25 during the Kargil conflict. Now, for those who are not aware of it, the normal operating parameters for a MiG-25 on a reconnaissance mission was at an altitude of 20 kilometers with a speed of over Mach 2. But for this mission, they had to think and fly out of the box. The MiG-25 had an issue with the camera film, which had a tendency to skip while capturing photographs. Moreover, its cameras were designed to capture large buildings and tank movements, not small tents and tiny bunkers on hilltops. So a plan had to be established. The key was to maintain a V/H ratio during the reconnaissance mission, which stood for the velocity at which the aircraft had to fly over the distance from the target of the aircraft. In this case, the velocity was calculated at 0.95 Mach over a height of 10 kilometers. Unfortunately, this was outside the standard operating procedure for the MiG-25. and led to a number of pilots actually rejecting the proposal to fly this sortie. Until the hero of our story, or I should say one of the heroes of our story, Wing Commander PJ Thakur, came into the picture and agreed to fly this unconventional mission. It would be downright criminal of me to not mention his name in the story. Many people are barely even aware that without his involvement, the outcome of the strike sorties after this might have been completely different, if not impossible. A whole new series of operating procedures had to be generated to make this mission successful. Another quirk of the MiG-25 variant used by the Indian Air Force was that it had no defensive weaponry. Its defense, just like the SR-71, was its ability to fly faster and higher than the adversaries. Therefore, during this mission, the MiG-25 flying at an unusually low altitude of 10 km, extremely slow at 0.95 Mach, was susceptible to enemy interception. To address this concern, a detachment of Mirage 2000s had to escort the MiG-25. Speaking of the Mirage 2000, there is another quirk to be mentioned here. The Mirages equipped with drop tanks had a maximum allowable speed of 0.95 Mach. The coincidence was unbelievable, as it was just enough to stay together with the MiG-25 during the mission. They were barely able to stick together, but somehow managed to fly the mission successfully. In one single sweep, the MiG-25 captured the whole front line, covering a distance of 200 kilometers. Now the only thing left out was to carry the strike, and this time the Mirages were ready for it. Now I know the strike on the Tiger Hill might have seemed like the turning point of the war, but on the contrary, the strike on the region of Muntot was the most significant mission undertaken by the Air Force. The strike resulted in the death of over 300 intruders, essentially crippling the logistics of the Pakistani army. And at that altitude, if the logistics stops, the war stops. The reason why the strike on Muntot didn't get as much attention as Tiger Hill was because the strike footage of the Tiger Hill had been circulated, which gained more attention in the media. Nonetheless, the strike on Tiger Hill was the final nail in the coffin. On 24 June 1999, a strike package consisting of 4 Mirage 2000H was dispatched from Adhampur. Armed with PV laser-guided bombs and the Israeli leading pod. To add to the pressure, the chief of the Indian Air Force was also flying in a Mirage 2000 in the formation. Additionally, this was the first time the laser-guided bombs were being used by the Air Force. They were not even used in a training mission before, so suffice it to say, the pressure was on. In charge of the strike on the first Mirage was Wing Commander Raghu Nambiar, along with his co-pilot, Squadron Leader Manish Yadav. All along the way, they repeatedly checked to ensure all switches and knobs were in their designated positions. Nearing the strike point, they accelerated to over 1000 km an hour to give the optimal drop for the laser-guided bomb and release the weapon. At exactly 7:30 am, the bomb hit the top of the Tiger Hill, obliterating any intruders holed up on the hill. Overall, the Kargil War and Operation Safed Sagar showcased the prowess of the Indian Air Force. And this was not the first war where the Indian Air Force played a vital role in turning the tide of the war, as during the 1971 Indo-Pak War, the Indian Air Force played a major role in the massive victory over Pakistan. To learn more about a pilot who did victory loops over an active enemy runway during the 1971 war, watch this video here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.